it is super helpful to know that, for people that are auditioning anywhere, to realize how much more they're looking at beyond what you sort of assume that they're looking at. It's not just learn the packet.
How do I play paradiddles?
Right. It's not just that. They are,
partly that,
they're doing everything they can, especially with people that they don't know, to evaluate what your potential is, who you can be. Are you a Pulse person, Pulse Pal person?
Right.
Do you have the potential to be who we need you to be at the end of the season?
Exactly.
Not today.
Yeah.
So they're looking at
everything,
a wide scope of things, and it sounds like they're taking into account things beyond what's happening there immediately, like Richie's experience with you or his exposure to you.
Because my audition for Vanguard, he's talked to me about it. That was a very big point for him in terms of his understanding of me and what my skill set was, because he could tell that I wasn't experienced, but that I had a drive and that I had a knack for it.
And that also he sees you at Vanguard Cadets auditions, and then he sees you a year later.
Right. He sees me during the season.
He sees what you did.
Exactly.
With that information. He sees how you responded to the teaching. He saw, because you can extrapolate somebody's growth potential from like, this is how good they were this day. We know what happened in between. This is how good they are today.
Yeah. Well, because there was a very specific moment to me that I was very proud of what I had done with Vanguard Cadets, but especially when some of the Odyssey guys like Andrew and Tim, they come up to me, because some of them were at Pulse Pal auditions that year, and they come up to me after seeing like the full battery thing, and they're like, "What happened?" Yeah, they're like, "You're a completely different drummer." And it really was that summer. But I'm auditioning, and I could tell that someone had gotten talked to, because I was by myself, and then out of nowhere, the three vets come up. So it was Mark and Timmy and Spencer, and they all come up to me and like, "Hey, like, what's your name? What's your experience? How old are you? Blah blah blah." And I tell them all this stuff, and then we all start drumming. And they're just like asking me questions, and I'm asking them questions, and I do my individual, and I play like 3 things, which is a good sign for those of you typically. Like if you're unsure of whether or not you're doing good in an audition and they don't ask you to play too much at an individual, it's typically because you're doing well. I didn't know that at the time, but I do my individual, and they're like, "Yeah, like, you're having a really good audition, just keep it up." They get to the visual audition portion, and that changed. That was a big reason why I was inches from getting cut in 19. Was my marching was just terrible. Yeah,
you were stronger, but
I just didn't have the technique.
Right.
I didn't have the technical facility. Like I had the strength, ish. I did not have the cardio.
Was it the choreo? Do you have a hard time with the choreography?
I had a time. The dance choreography. I think I was semi-okay. I had dancing experience. I used to dance before I got into music. I did like hip hop when I was around like 11 to 13.
Please tell me there's video of that.
There is.
Yeah. All right.
It's not going anywhere. But there is video of it. So the choreography felt okay. It was mainly the marching. That was a big, but I was on a smaller drum, 3. I was not expecting to be put on 3. I was auditioning for 4 and 5. They end up putting me on 3. For the audition, I make it through the audition weekend, and then they're like, "Okay, well, we're actually looking at you for Pulse, not PAL." Because I told them specifically, like in my individual too, like I'm auditioning for PAL. And then the PAL guys kind of laughed, and they were like, "Why?" And I kind of explained sort of what my thing was, and everyone was like, "Okay." And I didn't know what it meant. And then they told me they were looking at me for Pulse, but because of my age and so many things, they were like, "We just don't know. Like, you being in high school, your lack of experience, we're not sure yet, but we're looking at you." I find out later that was mainly John, just being like, "Nope," because they had a big, which is totally fair, by the way. Like, I have no...
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Number one, they can get you in the program
really early.
And it's just like, you can just, imagine what they can do with you
for
a number of
years.
Yeah. Or we had a similar situation when I taught OCI with Arjun, if you know who that is, who's a snare drummer.
Yeah.
Arjun was 14, when we took him, and we absolutely had that conversation. Again, double-edged sword. Could he handle it physically? Him, and even just like the mix, the social dynamic of him being so much younger than everybody else in the group. Talk to the parents and all of that stuff. But then we were like, man, if we can get this guy going this early, then the sky is the limit. Imagine the growth potential.
So all those conversations were being had. They were talking to my parents. They were talking to my band director. They were talking to my principal. They were doing all of it because they needed to vet me essentially because they didn't know. No one really knew. I mean, Richie could speak for me as a player, and John could see that I could play, but he looked at my visual audition and then my age and like everything on paper, and he was like, "Why are we doing this?"
Yeah.
And I remember I auditioned for like another 2 weekends where I was technically rehearsing.
Yeah.
Essentially, because no one else was really there. They weren't really like auditioning anyone else. They were just trying to see if I could do it. And then like on a Wednesday, I get a text. I texted Richie and was like, "Hey, do you have any updates?" He's like, "Oh yeah, you made it." He just like was so offhand about it, and I lost it. I was so excited. And like you said, the social dynamic, that was a big thing too, because at the time, again, I wasn't doing much because that's just not who I was.
Yeah.
I wasn't going out to wherever. I wasn't going to parties. I was drumming and playing clarinet all the time.
Yeah.
It was all lunch,
And so
after school.
You were a senior in high school?
I was a senior.
Yeah.
And I had my really close group. It wasn't like I was doing nothing. I had my really close group of friends.
I will tell you this at the time. This guy was super proud of you for making it because I remember him talking about you all the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate it a lot. And I remember specifically you, like a lot of support from you in those early years, which was very, very helpful.
Well, I mean, that's what, when I've talked about it before. We teach as a community, and a lot of the responsibility we have beyond just any one particular competitive season is to, take care of our students in such a way as they are able to go to somebody else, be handed off to somebody else and thrive. That has to be in the forefront of your mind when you teach in an area like this, where it's just like,
at a place where you're not the destination.
Right.
You're just like the stepping stone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Lots of support from everyone in my previous years, which was so great. And then, so I'm there, and everything you said pops up of, man, this is really hard with school. If I get even a little behind with school, my weekends are gone. And by this point, I'm not as strong. So I'm coming off of the weekends and I'm hitting my bed and knocking out until I have to wake up at 7 a.m. on Monday. So it's like, I'm not going to do homework in that time. So school was so much more difficult. It's part of the reason why I struggle recommending kids who are in high school to do independent. I know how much it helped me and how much I learned, but at the same time, I also know how freaking damaging and difficult it was for me at the time.
And your parents were really, I'm sure, really on you about that.
Oh yeah. Well, because that was their thing, is like, they were like, well, this is a huge time commitment. Your school can't suffer. It did. If I'm being entirely honest, it was a real struggle, and I was luckily I was able to work out a thing with my school counselor and with my teachers, and they had an understanding and they knew the scope of it. They knew the gravity of what it meant for me to be in a group like that at my age.
Yep.
And they were accepting of it and worked with me. So I got lucky. And for anyone who is involved in high school and is doing independent, you need to talk to your teachers, and you need to try to work something out like that, because you're not it's very, very difficult to figure it out on your own. I had a lot of support. But then also the social thing of, I wasn't very social at the high school level, let alone with 3 age outs on a baseline, and Emily, who was 21. And these guys are people that I had been looking up to. And then you had people like David Ramirez and Christian Blitt Hansen and Zach and Jamal and Cameron Ayers and Trent Gronwald and Whitney and all these people where I'm like, I'm hyperventilating showing up in the gym because I'm looking at them and I'm like, what is going on?
Now hold on. In the back of your mind, were you still like, but yeah, Broken City?
Well, honestly, there was the part of me that was worried, and my dad too. Because he originally didn't want me to go to Pulse.
Really?
Because he didn't like the 2018 show very much at the time. Because by that point,
that's funny that your dad became such a fan that's like, no, I didn't like that.
No,
show.
yeah. Well, that was the thing is like, now my parents are getting involved.
Oh yeah.
So he had been going to all the Odyssey shows and all that. So now he's seeing all these groups, and he's like, it was so funny. He called RCC from like a month before
2018.
Yeah. It's the craziest thing. But he was like watching all these groups. He's like, I don't know, man. RCC. He's like,
your dad's great.
Yeah.
It's I like you know it's I've had so many great conversations with him like during and actually even probably even more so after that season at Odyssey.
Yeah.
Like talking to him, watching you in the lot, with at Pulse. He and I don't even know if he told you this, but he and I had a great conversation this year in the lot in Dayton. I was, waiting to film Matrix, and he just walks up, and we ended up like chatting about you for like, 20 minutes or something like
cool.
that. It was
I don't
really
think
great.
he
But
told me
I mean, incredibly supportive.
Yeah.
But also like, hey man, if he's going to be hanging around, he might as well, like get into it.
Yep.
Good
100%.
guy.
So he, very involved. But at that point, it had gone through my head, but the opportunity of marching a world-class group like Pulse, and I loved The Uninvited. It was one of my favorite shows of all time.
Yep.
And I loved
I wish they
Garden.
would, even though they're coming off winning back-to-back gold medals. So many people talk about how much Uninvited is like their favorite
Yep.
Pulse show.
It's like the stock favorite indoor show.
I wish they would do that more. More of what that show was, because and this is just my personal, whatever. Take it for what it's worth. But I really feel like that show plays to everything that they do really well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I think you can't deny how without even trying, everybody's like, oh yeah, I love that year.
Right.
Because it's really them doing so many things well. And yeah, so that's just my little soapbox on that.
And that from like an insider perspective, that is what POW is to them now. So their understanding of the two groups, and this started, I want to say in 2020, they weren't really telling anyone. And then in 22, they told the members of like it being Pulse is the concept, POW is the story. So Pulse being a little bit more abstract, a little bit more
avant-garde,
a little bit more out there, because that partly is where the indoor scene is going, but also secondarily from a creative standpoint, it's where they felt they did their best stuff themselves and the things that they enjoyed the most. So, and then the POW thing, they didn't want to get rid of the story stuff because of how good they are at that. And there was something about POW and the way that ensemble played and what they were historically known for, where the story thing lent itself really well to the POW identity. So, anyways, complete sidetrack. I'm going into Pulse 19 and I'm losing my mind because I'm so overwhelmed by everyone around me.
And then before you know it, Vanguard auditions.
Yeah.
So like you were overwhelmed. You were trying to be like, can I even do this?
Exactly. And then in
Right?
December,
Yeah.
I get the first round of Vanguard auditions. I get my first callback for Vanguard.
Yeah.
This is for 2019.
This is for
correct?
2019. And every single weekend, we're staging, we're learning something new, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done.
And you're going to school and you're
I'm
trying to graduate.
And I'm going to school and I'm trying to graduate, and I'm applying for colleges and all trying to figure out what I'm going to be doing for the next 4 years of my life at least. And talking to my parents about, I think I'm going to do percussion full time, and they're like, ugh, because I've been doing clarinet for so long, and that was scary for them, as I'm sure as it makes sense to be, Obviously, it ended up being fine. The more I'm here, so it ended up being fine. But yeah, so I'm doing all those things, and like you said, Vanguard auditions are coming around. So I'm taking lessons with Richie and asking him a lot about that, what that takes. Because I'm looking at Pulse, and I'm like, man, I'm struggling. The first time we did our opener, full run of the opener, my heart was pounding out of my chest. And I was so tired, and I was like, how am I going to do another 4 minutes of this? Because our show was absurdly long that year too. It was almost 8 minutes. It was like 7:45.
I love that show.
Such a good show.
Yeah.
Such an I'm
The
so
Green
glad.
Table, right?
Yeah. Divided we fall.
Yeah, that's what it's called. But yeah.
Yeah, no, but everyone knows
knows
it's
it
the
as
Green
the
Table.
Green
Green
show.
Table, yeah.
Which is such a statement that actually comes from a dance called the Green
Oh yeah,
Table.
yeah. And I actually looked at that on YouTube and stuff. Yeah.
But so doing that show, being like, man, I can barely do this. I get to Vanguard auditions, and I find that I can hold my own better than I was expecting because of Pulse, and because I essentially had been in fight or flight for 3 years. of every group that I was in. It was, you need to figure this out because you're the least experienced. You're the person that's been playing this the least amount of time, but you love it. So we're giving you the opportunity. So like, you need to prove yourself, sort of thing. So fight or flight at all times. And I get to Vanguard and Vanguard auditions. That was it. That was what it was. And it was all playing, and it was my jam. And we're sight reading stuff. And I loved sight reading. I loved being able to be like, I can show you that I know what this is, and I haven't even had to practice this. That was like one of my favorite things to be able to do. It's why I practiced it so much. So I was constantly learning new stuff, trying to work on that skill of how quickly can I get this chunk to the point of where I don't need the music and I never tick it. Ever. Like, not just from a perspective of like, oh, I did a tickless run. It's like, how many times can I do a tickless run in a row? Can I get it to the point of I don't even need a warm up and I can just play this? So that all that stuff played really well into a lot of the morals and a lot of the things that they look for in players at Vanguard, which is intense musicality. Sight reading is a huge thing. So like charts, Paul calls it, like reading a chart. Can you do that fast? How fastly can you do that? Because during the season, we would put together a movement in a day. He would give us 4 minutes of music. We'd get a subs block and a battery block, and then we're an ensemble. So that was it. And the expectation is like, you have it memorized by that point. So they look for those skills. So I was like a fish in water. I loved it so much and just could not get enough of it. I didn't make it, but they told me, they were like, well, like, you did well in the audition, blah, blah, blah. You're young, come back. Right. Please come back. Right. And that to me was a good sign.
You didn't think about going to Troopers?
That's the funny thing. So I sit down.
And I say that because let's like, this might sound bad. It's like, the inside joke is like Troopers is the feeder corps for Vanguard, but the guys in the Troopers line, they don't want to hear that. But it's like,
in a lot of ways, it is for a lot of those guys because it's where they go to play Paul's stuff. I think I can't remember who referred to it, but they called it the Church of Paul. Is the Troopers percussion section because you learn the same stuff and you're playing the same music. So it's like, why not? I sit down after being cut. Like, they talk to me. I'm watching what was now the 2019 Vanguard baseline play. And I get a message from Johnny Green of like, you have a spot at Troopers. Just let me know if you can do it. I ended up deciding not to do it for college purposes. And that was a joint decision between me and my parents. Sure. And how hard my senior year was between doing Pulse in school and how close that was to turning into a train wreck and kind of throwing me off the rails.
Maybe a good thing, a blessing in disguise.
No,
like it gave you like a little bit of a buffer where you could get caught up, recharge,
100%. Get
more stable.
Yeah, and there's always the part of me,
a tactical pause.
Yes,
yeah,
100%. It's a very good way of putting it. Because every time I look at the 19 line, there's always that part of me that's just like, man, like I wish.
Sure,
one tear comes down.
Yeah. Because that bass book was so cool, and those guys are so cool.
Hey, that was a killer line. Yeah, let's
so
face
good.
it.
And but at the same time, I feel like if I had gone into Vanguard after my senior year and then gone into college and then gone into COVID, I would have been a nightmare. Yeah. So that summer, being able to relax and take a breather was 100% the right move, without a doubt.
Did you go to shows that year? Did you go to finals or anything?
No, I went to Oceanside and Pasadena. So like the PC home show and Rose Bowl, for those of you that don't know.
Just backing up for one quick second.
Yeah.
You guys had a pretty successful season at Pulse.
Yeah, we did.
That was the year that Broken City
ended up. But it was close. It was like a 1/10 of a point, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that ensemble like executed the heck out of that show.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, I look for a long time. Up until this year, I could only watch that performance as I was now. So I would look at myself and be like, man, I am struggling.
Mm-hmm. You're talking 2019?
Yeah.
Oh,
I would look at my 2019 self and be like, man, like, his posture is bad. His technique is weird. Like, all the things were because I was so focused on self-improvement for so long. So I would look at that and be like, okay, well, I got to make sure I'm not doing that now. Which is the funny thing. Now I can look back on it and be like, holy crap, like I did that. Yeah. And I was 17 when I made the line, and I turned 18 in December of that season. So I was young. So I'm proud of what I was able to do. I'm proud of what that ensemble did.
You should be.
Thank you. That show was really cool. It was really intense. I mean, I always say we had like 2 closers in one, because we had the whole 186 section that I already was winded. And then John was like, all right, 210. Him and Ian, freaking mad scientists, all the way to the end. So
let me ask you this. I mean, because you were even like, you had young eyes, and we all know for all these groups, what they look like from the outside versus what they look like from the inside.
It's a very different story.
You really, I guess it's safe to say you really enjoyed what it looked like from the inside.
Yes. And to the point of like, when the idea of the next season came up in my head of what that would even look like, it wasn't even a question. Broken City was nowhere near my radar anymore. And that was partly because I was
going to say, you're part of that Pulse family now.
Yeah. And I was so, like you said, like I'm so close to these guys. Yeah. And also from an intellectual perspective of, I got better and I started understanding bass drumming more, and I realized, no, this is where I want to be. And this is the important thing at the time. This is the closest thing to Vanguard.
Yeah.
In terms of bass drumming in indoor right now, this is where I need to be. And this is where I want to be because of the people involved. And that was that group was the first time I had ever experienced, or I guess it wasn't the first time I'd ever experienced. I need to stop speaking in absolutes. It was the first time I was aware that I was receiving unconditional love and care from a group of people, and from people that were so much older than me.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. I mean, that bass line literally like raised me for that year. They were so caring. They were so honest. They were so careful, and they were so compassionate. And I owe the world to those guys. And every time I see them, that it's just like the immediate just family of like, there's never a dull moment with them. I can always talk to them about anything. You know what I mean? Like one of those. So that season we were successful, and we did the gig, and at least playing wise, it took that bass line a little bit to figure it out. But we really figured it out in Dayton. We rewrote the second half of the closer solo, like 8 full bars, drill and music, first block in Dayton. That was scary, but we did it.
Was that the part with the chairs?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had the moment where we used to be like all getting up on the chairs at different times.
I remember that.
Stuff. And it just ended up not being what it needed to be. The moment just was not what it needed to be from a design standpoint or for the bass line. So we changed it, and it was so much better from a design standpoint and for what the players like what was our strengths, and what made sense for bass drumming in general. So it was great. It was a good decision, and we ended up doing really well on finals. I'm really happy with what we did.